All right. So this week we begin with vaYiqra, or pick up with vaYiqra 19, verse 30. We ended with 29, of course, and that's you shall not defile your daughter by making her a prostitute. You shall not allow prostitution in the land and fill it with wickedness. So God is obviously very much against prostitution. That's why most countries for so many centuries didn't allow it at all. And then as the progressive began to west, some one country in particular made it legal in certain places, and our country eventually made it somewhat legal in Nevada. So, it's just the way it goes, I guess. But God says no. Of course, America's not founded on the Jewish God. People say it's Judeo Christian, but sorta, because our laws really were based. If you were going to be a lawyer, you had to study what the Christians call the Old Testament. You literally had to study that and learn it. But from what I've read in all my law history classes and stuff, it seems to me that the whole purpose in reading the Old Testament, if you will, was that if you had the correct one, you learned the legal lingo, the formation of sentences and the words that are used or more common in the older Bibles back in the 1800s. So they had to study that, one, because those laws ultimately did come from the Bible for the most part, and then two, because the language of the Bible at the time was very similar to legalese, if you will. So that's something that they used to have to do. Wouldn't do you any good now, but that's the way they did it back in the olden days. Uh, sorry. So let's get started with 30. Very, very little literal translation from the Hebrew directly into English would be this: Shabbats, that's in plural. So the Hebrew word was obviously Shabbatot. So Shabbats, uh, Shabbatai, that means the same thing. It's just a different gender. Anyway, Shabbats, my. So we would say my Shabbat because we say everything backwards in English. But Shabbat's my, you shall guard he or it. You shall guard it. There's a word for he and the word for it, same word. The word she and it are the same. I shouldn't have put those two together like that. But the masculine of the word it in Hebrew is he, the word for he. And the feminine is the word for she. So there are people who will tell you that there is no Hebrew word for it, but yes, there is. There is. It's just that it's a gender specific word, which seems odd. You'd think that you wouldn't need gender for that, but Hebrew had it, biblical Hebrew anyway. So it says, Shabbat's my, you shall guard it, and sanctuary me, so my sanctuary, shall fear you all. I Yahweh. So see, God was a Texan. Just there's your proof. Anyway, so we're going to start off with Shabbatai, Shabbatot. That's the masculine and the feminine of the same word, Shabbat, right? But that's the plural. Here's what Jasenius said about it, and he's still the gold standard as far as I'm concerned. But under Shavat with a V, Shavat in the root form, you can find it in your Jasenius under number 7673 if you have a Jasenius with numbers in it, which I may or may not have had something to do with all those years ago. But it says to rest, to keep as a day of rest. But here's the important part. And Jasenius said, the primary idea appears to be that of to sit down, to sit still, When this word is used of men, it is the opposite of to do labor. So it's to do no labor. Then he goes on, of land which is not tilled, to rest from labor. So the land doesn't labor, but labor being done on the land is, if there's no labor being done, if the field's just being left alone, that field is said in Hebrew to have a Sabbath. And every, I forget how many, I think it's every 7th year, you're supposed to not plant anything to give your field a Sabbath. We haven't gotten to that law yet, but it's coming up. And he goes on after that to say it's of abstaining from journeying, to cease, to desist, to leave off properly, to desist from doing. And remember, this is 1800. So it says from doing anything. We wouldn't say it that way today. We would say to desist from doing something. Because if you say anything in our world today, that would mean you can't do any, well, that you can't breathe, you can't open your eyes, you can't shut your eyes, you can't comb your hair, you can't eat food. See, that's a little too broad, right? So by anything, it's back to that idea of not doing labor. And then next word here is tishimoro. And yes, that is how they would have pronounced it back in the day. That's not how we pronounce it today. But anyway, it's you shall guard it. So it's a command. And because the root word is shamar, and they've added the tate, the t sound to the beginning of it, t, sha, or she. But so this is the command. It's to keep, to watch, to guard. In a narrower sense, that's a hard word to say, as a garden, a man tending to his garden. And so think of that image here, because for you to understand a word in Hebrew, biblical Hebrew, you absolutely have to understand the root of that word. And the root is the image that goes behind the root. That's the most important part. No matter what form that word is in, whether it's in one of the binyanim, hefil, hofal, pual, nefal, all the different and I don't really have a good way to explain to you in English what that is. But there are different formations of the word. It's to make them it's like this. You can take a word like, the idea is to throw a ball. So you can say, toss me the ball. He threw the ball. There was heat on that ball. You know what I'm saying? So that one word, by adding different letters, can intensify or can de-intensify. I don't know what I should be saying there, but it sets up that sort of a thing. I don't know how to explain that or give you an English word that would truly explain what that means. But anyway, it doesn't matter what binyan it is that word has been formed in. You still have to go back to the root. It doesn't matter what's been added to the front, the middle, or the end. You still have to go back to the root. The reason you go back to the root is to understand the image behind the root. And so you build from that, you understand what you're looking at. If you don't do that, you're going to misunderstand the verse that you're reading. And translators were horrible about that because your translators didn't know this stuff. Anyway, that's for another day. That's a much longer conversation about the issues with the translators, but I'm just going to leave that there. So what we have to look at here is that he's saying that in a very narrow sense, it's of a man tending to a garden. Well, what's a man do to a garden? Well, he has to till the land, he has to turn the ground over, he has to pluck away the weeds. Because if you take away the weeds and you cut off the dead leaves and branches, that causes the plants to flourish. Because a plant, when they start having leaves and things die, I don't know if you know this, but the plant is trying to heal itself. So some of the resources that could be going out to the healthy leaves and in branches and things is being wasted on something that it cannot heal. And so the gardener goes in and cuts that stuff away, and then all that, those resources go out to the rest of the plant. And that's why that plant begins to flourish. You get more fruit from it and that sort of a thing. So the gardener is there to take away the bad so that the good can come up in you. It's not there to make it better. He's there to take away the bad so that it's through its own design can become better. And that's in a very narrow sense. And then he goes on to keep, to reserve, also to preserve, to observe, to attend to anything, sometimes used in a base sense, that's bad, of course, to watch narrowly, to lie in wait for someone. And then you've got kind of the opposite, is to besiege a city. It's not exactly lying in wait. This is an attack. So it's kind of the opposite there. Again, Hebrew being a primitive language, as it's called, means that there's fewer words with lots more meaning. So you're supposed to tend to and guard and preserve, this Sabbath, because it's talking about the Sabbath. And it says right here that the Sabbath belongs to God, because God himself is talking. Someone's writing down what God's saying, and God said, these are my Sabbaths. Yeah, and there's more than just the Sabbath. The Sabbath is not just from Friday night sundown to Saturday night sundown. That's the weekly Sabbath. There are other Shabbat, there are Shabbatot, Shabbatai. There's more than just one Sabbath in the Bible. When you have a feast, let's say it begins at sundown on Wednesday. Well, that begins the Sabbath for that feast, and it's over at sundown on Sunday. So your Sabbath can literally happen any day of the week. That does not cause the one on Friday night sundown to Saturday night sundown to go away. That's another. You can have, technically speaking, you can have up to 4 Shabbatot, 4 Sabbaths in a single week. That would really take some funky alignment of the stars and moons and stuff, but it could happen, because you can have, there's like 2 Sabbaths at the beginning of, is it Pesach that I'm thinking of, or Shavuot, or Sukkot, I mean. Sukkot. Yeah, because you got the one at the beginning and the one at the end. Then you can have that, you will definitely have at least one in the middle. But if Sukkot were to start, say, on a Friday, so you've got 1, 2, it's going to go all the way around to the next week, Friday and Saturday. You wind up with 4 Sabbaths in the same week. Pretty cool, huh? So anyway, and I'm sure that happens at some point in time, and probably has happened, more than once since the beginning of time. But that's something to keep in mind. And then so you're going to guard the sanctuary, guard the Sabbath, sorry. And then the next word, of course, is sanctuary. But it says mikdash, which is mikdashi. Sorry, I didn't see the yod at the end of that. So it's my sanctuary. So you're going to guard the Sabbaths and my sanctuary. a sanctuary. That is, kadosh is your root word. It's a holy thing, something consecrated, a sanctuary, a holy place, especially used of the holy tabernacle of the Jews. It's used of the temple of the Jews. It's used of the synagogue, the adat, to say it plural, of the Jews, the Yehudim in plural. And the reason why it's used of more than just one place is because God said that wherever his authority was, that was a holy place. And that gets translated to name, and it gets to where people don't understand what God's talking about. He's talking about his authority. Well, what's God's authority? It's called the Torah. The Torah is God's authority over our lives. And it's a voluntary thing. He doesn't force anybody to accept his rule. You're under it whether you like it or not. God created the law of gravity. And, you've heard me say it before, jump out of an airplane at 15,000 feet without a parachute. You're going to find out that God's law, that you're still under God's law, whether you like it or not, whether you're atheist or not, you're still under God's law. But God doesn't make us do that. He has authority over us, but he's not the enforcer, if you will. We are, and not over others, over ourselves. Ruh-roh. I was hearing myself, so I wasn't having a Mitch McConnell moment there. I shouldn't laugh. That's awful. That's actually happened to me before. Except I was in mid sentence when it happened to me. So my words slurred, and everybody around me started making fun of me. Oh, Robert's had too much to drink tonight, blah, blah, blah. Sitting there drinking a cup of tea or something. I wasn't drinking alcohol. But, they're making the jokes because my words slurred. And I just sat there and stared off into space for a little bit there. And then all of a sudden I came back to myself and I just made a joke about it, just like he did. That's a stroke. That's not the kind that takes out your face, but it can wipe out your memory. That's what one of my strokes did to me. Or no, two. Yeah, two of them. Because something up here that connects a bunch of things together like explodes, and then you don't have connections. And so it doesn't take out all of your memory. It just takes out bits and pieces. But the awesome thing is the way our brains are designed. We didn't morph into this. The way we were designed is that little thing where all that stuff interconnected, your connections find another way to get to where they're supposed to be. How they know where they're supposed to go? Well, they were designed to know. Just saying. You guys do realize that there's no such thing as natural in the Bible, right? There is no such thing as nature. Let me put it that way. There's no such thing as nature in the Bible. And we as followers of the Bible shouldn't think in those terms. We shouldn't think that way. Evolution is not a proven fact. Evolution is still to this day a theory, and it is a theory that is falling apart massively over these last few years, mainly because of that telescope that's made it way out into the great beyond, and the scientists are finding out things are not quite what they thought they were. But everything is by design. Monkeys do what they do because they were designed to do what they do. Grasshoppers do what they do because they were designed to do what they do. The monkeys did not come from some dinosaur of some sort from way back when and over time morph into the monkey that we know today. And then They did not morph into the humans that we know today. None of that happened. Everything was created at one point, and we all do exactly what we were created to do from the beginning to this day. Amen and amen. And I'm not giving medical advice here. This is Bible advice. And so far as I know, that's acceptable. Anywho, so we've got to do the same thing with the sanctuary that we do with the Sabbath. But this sanctuary, we got to go back and look at the root word here to get the image of the root word here. And one of the most important things that we need to know about this root word is that it's holy, it's holiness, it's the thing that is set aside for God. And so, this place where God's authority, his Torah, is taught, is a place that is set aside for God. There's all my growing up life, I used to hear people say, I can worship God out on a lake while I'm fishing. I can worship God. I'll be over here doing this and over there doing that. I don't have to go to church. I don't have to go to synagogue. I don't have to be a part of any religious organization. Well, the Bible says otherwise. In order for a place to be holy, in order for a thing to be holy, it has to be repeated in the same way at all times. It has to be set aside for God and God alone. For instance, the clothing that I'm wearing, you might notice I wear the same thing every week, right? And no, this stuff doesn't smell. We keep everything washed and clean. I don't wear it every day. See, if I wore it every day, it wouldn't be holy. It has to be set aside for God because it's in the holy sanctuary. The day is set aside for God. The Shabbat itself is set, the weekly Shabbat is set aside starting at from the time the sun goes down on Friday until the time the sun goes down on Saturday. That is the Sabbath being spoken of here. But it's also the Sabbaths that wind up on different days because of the holidays. They're all exactly the same thing. You're supposed to get together with God's people. You're supposed to learn of the Torah at that time. You are not supposed to be showing up in your PJs. You're not supposed to be, you're supposed to take a shower. You're supposed to be freshly bathed. You're supposed to be dressed up, not necessarily in some, $10,000 handmade designer. No, you just need to be clean. Your clothes need to be clean. You need to be clean. All of that's part of the holiness laws. We're just not at that place at the moment, but I'm just reminding you that that's all part of the law of God, is that we're supposed to be this way. Why? Because that's what makes something holy. All right. Then it says, and so the sanctuary, Tira'u, you will. They say fear in the English Bibles. That's such a horrible translation. I mean, you're not supposed to be scared to death of God. You're not even supposed to be a little bit scared of God. You should be in awe of God. You should be what's a word I could be using here? Because the idea behind this word is to tremble. And this is why the translators mess this up, because they think your knees are knocking and you're trembling from fear. No. The best way to relate this that I can think of is this is like the trembling of a married couple when they're finally alone on their wedding night. Have I been careful enough in how I said that? It's the trembling for joy, the trembling of awe. Is there any time you should fear God? Well, yeah, if you have sworn an allegiance to God, if you've told him and others that you're going to live according to God's law from this moment on and you don't, yeah, now you kind of have something that your knee should be knocking at this point, because you made a promise and God's going to make you keep that promise. And that can cost you everything. It's why Jews don't proselytize. It's why we don't go out into all the world and preach the gospel. Problem with the New Testament in that verse is not what was said. Not a thing problematic about what Yeshua said to those men. What's problematic is what the church has turned it into. Those men who had just spent 3 years of their lives being taught what the Bible says about Mashiach, the coming of the Mashiach, and what all of that entailed, because believe me, nobody in that time knew what it was. They didn't know if there was 1, 2, or 3 messiahs. They had no clue. Don't believe me? Just read the Dead Sea Scrolls. Good Lord Almighty. Nobody had any idea. They knew that, there was supposed to be a suffering Messiah, and then they knew there was supposed to be a conquering Messiah, and they knew there was supposed to be a healing Messiah, and they knew that he was going to be beaten so badly that he couldn't hardly even be recognized as a human being. All of that's in the prophets. I'm not talking about anything from the New Testament when I just said that. That all came from the prophets. So how do you put all that together? How does this Messiah, is he human? Is he not? Because it kept calling him a man. But how can a man be Messiah? God said, I am Yahweh, and other than me, there is no Mashiach. There is no salvation. There is no Messiah. He didn't have to say Mashiach. Mashiach is the same thing. It's from the same root word. He's literally saying, that verse literally says that God is the Messiah. So how can God be a man? These guys had no clue. Well, when Yeshua came along, he takes 3 years of his life to explain to these 12 men, one of whom didn't make the cut. So wasn't saying it. Was that one guy still alive when he said that? No, this is after that guy had killed himself. So at this point, he's only talking to the 11, and maybe there were others around, but specific to the story were the 11. He's telling them to go to all of the synagogues from where they all came and teach the people in the synagogues, the rabbim in the synagogues, what they've learned. That was their whole world. Their world didn't include North America or South America. It did not include Australia. It didn't include China. You follow what I'm saying here? Their world was the Jewish world, and they were sent to the Jewish world with very specific instructions, and they did exactly that. Now there is a man who wrote a story about how all of those men died doing that, and whether that story is true or not, I think is very iffy, because it was written a long time after the last man died. And there's nothing from that time period written by them or anyone who knew them saying how they died. So we don't actually know if they were martyred. Justin's Book of Martyrs, if you want to know what book I'm referring to. Wasn't written at the time. He didn't know those people. He didn't live through that. And where he got that information, I don't know. Maybe it's accurate. Maybe it's not. Doesn't really matter. Those were the men that were sent into all of the world, the Jewish world. You're not, Christian or not, especially Christian. If you're reading that and you think you're supposed to go out and everywhere you meet somebody, you have to tell them about Jesus or you're going to hell. No. But I digress. So here's my simple translation. You shall guard my Shabbatot, my Sabbaths, Shabbatai. I guess I should have written it the way they did. I always say Shabbatot, but Shabbatai is more correct. And you shall reverence. That's the word I was trying to think of a while ago. Reverence is the right word. And you shall reverence my mikdash, my sanctuary. I, he said, am Yahweh. So this is a direct coming out of the mouth of God himself. I have a note here. There are two reasons why Shabbat is in plural. You probably know this already. There is a Shabbat every week. That's the first one. And two, there are other Shabbatot, i.e. days of rest. And I've already gone over that. So I will move on. Ooh, kind of drug that out a little too long. All right, we have 31. Very, very literal English. Not you shall turn they to the seer, and to the false prophet not you shall seek, to unclean her or it. In them I Yahweh God's you. So we have tifanu, and that's to turn, and the u is they. So you will not turn, because, well, the first word was all, which is not. And then the next word was tifanu. So you will not turn to. In the Jasenia said, in order to go anywhere, hence to turn to or toward any place, to turn oneself away from anyone or to anyone. It works both ways with this word. Figuratively applied to time, to turn itself, to pass away, to pass on. You get the idea. It means the same thing. There's nothing particularly especial about that, huh? So then we have L, it's to. So you will not turn to or toward. Toward ha-ovot, a seer. So you can only, if you're Jewish, you can only hang out with blind people. And you mostly do. I'll help myself out. Anyway, you know, this word, am I looking at the wrong word here? Okay. This word is used of a bottle, so-called from carrying water. Of course, bottles didn't exist back then. Not the way we would think of a bottle. We would call that a jug, I think. But anyway, that's what he's talking about when it says that. But it goes on, used of wine bottles. That's one use of the word. Remember, it's a what I call it, what kind of language? Primitive. Biblical Hebrew is a primitive language, so you get a lot of different meanings out of a single word, which is why it's so important to get the correct one. They don't all apply, just the one that goes with the sentence applies. So then we have to mumble. Oh, now we're on to something. To mumble, i.e., in other words, a soothsayer who evokes the names of the dead by the power of incantations and magical songs in order to give answers as to future or doubtful things. And this actually happens in the Bible. So the Bible is telling us that this really happens. You do know the story, right? Somebody wants to know something. They go to a soothsayer, and the soothsayer invokes somebody's name, and that person, spirit appears and says, "Why have you brought me here?" That's in the Bible. Look it up. You'll love the story. It's a good one. So they're looking for answers. Then it says a python, the snake, a python, or a soothsaying demon. Okay, you might want to mark that out, and you're just saying, yes, there were no demons in the Bible, in the Hebrew Bible, or for that matter, in the New Testament either. But it got put there when they started translating it into English. All of a sudden, Jews had demons. And boy, did the Jews jump on that in the Dark Ages. Anyway, it says of the demon of which men are believed to be possessed. All of that comes after the biblical period. None of that should be in this book, in the Gesenius at all. Anyway, it's there. He wrote it. I still think he's the greatest. But anyway, he didn't get everything right. So it goes on of a dead person being raised up. It's even used for a ventriloquist, because amongst the ancients, they commonly abused this art of inward speaking for magical purposes. How then could it be the same Hebrew word should express a bottle and a ventriloquist, you ask? Well, from the magicians. When possessed with the demon, being as it were a bottle or a vessel, a sheath of this python. Okay, so snakes shed their skin, they shed their bottle, they shed their vessel, sort of. And then the magician is pretending that there's a demon inside his sock or whatever he was using. I would imagine that back then, because I don't know of any puppetry going on back in that time, but I would imagine what you just said is trying to describe here is that the magician or I'm trying to say musician. I don't want to say musician, but that's the word that's trying to come out of my mouth while I'm trying to say magician. I mean magician, not musician, right? But I'm mixing those two words together and finding it very difficult to speak. What I think is meant here, and I'm sure you'll agree, is that somebody who is a good, but the ventriloquist could make it seem as if other voices are coming, especially if you can throw the sound, it could make it sound like voices are coming from around the room. Or if you can make yourself sound like a completely different person when you talk. You see how people could see that as some kind of demon being in some person and stuff like that. This was a new thing in the 1st century CE. Brand new thing. It does not predate this. I've read all of the material from 300 BCE going through to 300 CE. I've read it in Latin, Greek, Hebrew, Aramaic. All of those languages. I've looked at just about everything I can find from that time period. And that's where it first begins, is somewhere around the early to mid 1st century CE. This idea of demon possession and all that came along. It was not known among the Jews. How do I know this? Because Josephus ran across this. He speaks about it in, I forget which book, but he talks about this Jewish guy who used to do the incantations, and at the end of the thing, the bowl would move to prove to him that this demon had been cast out of somebody and all that kind of stuff. Josephus didn't know what to make of it. He had never seen or heard of anything like it ever before. Now, this is a man who spent years of his life studying to be a Pharisee. He spent years of his life studying to be a Sadducee at Qumran. And then, no, not Sadducee, Essene. I knew something sounded wrong when it came out of my mouth, but I couldn't figure out what it was. And Essene at Qumran. He actually spent a couple of years at Qumran studying, their version of religion. And he spent some time with the Sadducees. That's all in his writings. He talks about that. And this man did after studying with the truly only three groups that existed other than the Hasidim of the time, and he'd never even heard of it. So if he hadn't heard of it, this is not something that was common to Judaism. They did not know what a demon was. They did not know what demon possession was. The reason why you find it in the New Testament, the reason why you find it in the Talmud is because in the Dark Ages, they went nuts with this stuff. The Jews grabbed a hold of it and began to write it all throughout the Talmud. And by the time you got to the 1700s, the late 1600s, early 1700s, Christians were so deep into it that when they translated the words of Josephus, what they said and what he said didn't even remotely match up. But the Christianity followed this line of thinking in the demonology. If you want to deep dive on that, you'll have to wait until my book comes out. It's in the introduction. I take you through the whole thing. I show you the actual text. You actually get to see the actual Greek text and the actual Hebrew text and my actual translation compared to what the men who did this said. I give you what they wrote, what Josephus wrote, in my translation of all of that's in the book. But anyway, so that's for another day, not for today. Ooh, I'm pushing it here. So this seer is somebody who does incantations. We would think of that as a witch today. Seer was also used. Is this the right word for that? No, it's not the right word. We have another word for seer that is used for someone. What we think of as a prophet today, the Bible called a seer. And this was the good thing. This was the God showing somebody something, and then they would relate that to somebody. Shamuel, tried to say Samuel and Shamuel at the same time. Anyway, that guy was a seer. We call him a prophet. And certainly he was a prophet. Not all prophets were seers, but all legitimately biblical seers were prophets, right? If they were of God. So if you have something that is of God, you have something that is an imitation of it, right? And we're talking about the imitation here. The seers that were of God and the prophets that were of God, they would come and say, God, this is what God says. That does not mean that God said something to them. More often than not, when they say, this is what God says, that's the equivalent of your rabbi or your pastor getting up and saying, tonight I'm going to teach you about Psalm 23. And so he teaches you all about Psalm 23. This is what God says. When they did that, they're talking about, I've been reading the Bible and looking around. I'm seeing this go on and seeing that go on. And here's what God says is going to happen as a result of that. So that's the seer, that's the prophet. The prophet was the one who taught the law. That's why not all prophets are seers. I teach the law. I don't have dreams. So not so far. God has not given me dreams to go tell people about. I had a dream years ago. Well, I think two of them, but very short, and will swear to you this day, I heard a voice from heaven. I doubt it was God Almighty, because I probably would have melted into a puddle of ooze if God would have spoken it himself. But I heard a voice from heaven, and it said a single word, just one word. And I used to feel a little ripped off about that until my wife finally, I was complaining about that one day, and my wife said, Robert, as big of a change as that one word made in your life, what do you think would have happened to you if God said a whole sentence? I was like, I'd be in the loony bin, wouldn't I? So, yeah, I thank God he only said one word, just one word. Anyway, But I wouldn't call myself a seer or something like that. I mean, a lot of people experience something like that in their life. Uh, but somebody who would be a biblically based seer would be somebody like Samuel. Keep, I keep wanting to say the Hebrew word and the English word at the same time. I think I said it right, but you guys know who I'm talking about, right? Shemuel was his actual name. All right, where are we? So this is the seer. You don't go turn into those. And then it says Baal or to Ha Yidonim or the false prophets. You know, if you don't like what Yirmiyahu, who's for whatever reasons they call him Jeremiah these days, but Yirmiyahu was his name. You know, if you don't like what he's saying, there's some prophets down here that'll tell you whatever you want, your, itching little ears want to hear. Don't do that, God said. And it's exactly what you think. It's somebody who's prophesying. I could name names. Here, it's just us, let me tell you. No, I'm not going to do that. I'm sure a lawsuit would ensue, and they have lots of money because they steal from the poor and the widows, and I don't. Anyway, that's apparently a very profitable business. Some of them are billionaires, as I hear. That's as close as I'm getting to that. All right, this is all which is not tevakshu. And you will not seek out. You don't search for. You don't inquire of. Don't, of what? Letama. Pollution, that which makes you unclean. Vachem, making them unclean. This is Ani Yahweh. Oh, okay. What? I'm hearing voices. Sounds an awful lot like my wife, but I can't make out the words. All right, so my translation: you shall not turn to a seer, and to false prophets you shall not seek. This, being a seer or a false prophet, is impurity in them. See, they're impure. The thing that they do makes them impure, and you don't seek after the impure. Then it says, I am Yahweh your God. Yeah, it does say it. Eloheha. All right. Okay, a seer, a bad seer, and the reason why I'm saying this about seer, and I may be sounding like I'm contradicting myself. Seer is an English word. I don't know what else to call this person. If I say false seer, I'm adding a word here that isn't in the book, because this is the word for a false seer. You follow? But the English word seer was used of the false ones, and the English word seer was used of the not false ones, the truthful ones, the ones of God. So the English word is being used. There's one English word being used for two different Hebrew words. So I don't know what else to say in my translation here. I don't really know how to point that out. So I'm trying my best to make you understand. I'm not contradicting myself. I just don't know I don't know what I can say other than seer. Yeah, I don't know. I can't think of a word to use here, because the English Bible, like I said, uses the same English word for these two different Hebrew words. So when this is saying seer, it's talking about the false seer. When this, of course, then for that matter, let me see, did it actually say false prophet, or did it just say prophet? Yeah. See, this is the structure of the same word. No, I don't want to say it that way. These are almost exactly the same word. This is not the word for prophet. I'm just now realizing this. False prophet's really the best way to say it in English, but now you're using two words for a single Hebrew word. I'm glad I came back and looked at this. This is Ho-Yidonim. I said that a while ago, is properly knowing, wise, hence a prophet, a wizard, always used in a bad sense of a false prophet, a spirit of divination, a spirit of Python, with which these soothsayers were believed to be in communication. That was one of the other things about the earlier days, particularly of early Hebrew culture, was that they thought these people who saw these visions and could tell the future were getting this information from a python. It probably comes from another culture and was just brought into the Jewish culture. I don't think that comes from early Jewish culture, but by the time you get to Moshe, it was obviously in their culture. So I don't really know if false prophet's the word I ought to use here. Let's say diviner. Let's call the bad person, the one who predicts the future, a seer, and the other one a diviner. They are literally two different ways of saying the same thing, because they are literally the same thing. Okay, so you shall not turn to a seer or to a diviner. You shall not seek. This, being a seer or a diviner, is impurity in them. I am Yahweh. So let's put that as the official translation. I do apologize. Can we go back to the other? It's me. I have run out of time. I don't have enough time to get into the next verse. Oh, wow. This next one, you got to hear this next week. This is awesome. This is really, really awesome. It says you have to listen to Robert Allen and do exactly what he says and send him on. No, it don't say that. It does talk about someone being old, so I can relate to this next one. Anyway, we'll pick up with verse 32 next week. But especially if you have kids from, say, the age of 12 to 40 or 50, try to get them to listen in next week. You'll want them to hear this. Shalom, shalom.
The blessing, vaYiqra. Yavarecha Yahweh v'yish merecha. Ya'er Yahweh panai v'lecha v'hunecha. Yisa Yahweh panai v'lecha v'yasim lecha shalom. And in English, may Yahweh cause you to lie down so that you may rest. May he touch and caress you. May he prepare you for what is ahead. May he watch over you. May he keep you from harm. May he cause goodness to grow in you and take away the bad. May he arrange your life and cause you to flourish. May he cheer you up and gladden your heart. May he cause his light to shine through you. May he show you tenderness, favor, and love in his presence. May he show you kindness and be delicate toward you. May he show you his generosity, mercy, compassion, and desire for you as it comes forth from the depths of his soul. May he lift you out of your pit and deliver you from the things that hold you prisoner. May he draw you to his chest and cast his eyes on yours. May he show you his love and desire for you as he cradles you in his arms. May he bear your punishment and pardon you of your sin. May he take you for his bride. May he establish a foundation in you. May he place his name on your heart and mind and make your body his temple. May you be his treasure. May you always be on his mind. May he draw you near and comfort you when you are afraid. May he assure you there is nothing to fear because he is with you. May you and all that concerns you be at peace, because he is your friend. Amen.